So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the EU banking on the UK's financial woes to break the Northern Ireland Protocol deadlock. So sources claim that Brussels believe a deal could be struck within a month because of the economic troubles in the UK. Brussels believes that the Northern Ireland Protocol could be struck within a month because of the economic turmoil. Talks have restarted, and the UK might assume, the EU might assume, the UK would not be in a financial position to start a trade war. The issue is that the UK's economic issues might further push Truss, in my opinion, to start a trade war, so that the consequences of Truss's actions can be blamed on the EU. They're blaming the issues around sterling and bonds on Russia, so we have, in a way, seen this before, plus blaming the EU is second nature to the UK. I mean, if you really think about it, that's very possible it could happen. If the UK starts tanking, start a trade war with the EU, all of our problems are on them, not us. I really don't think Liz would be in a rush to solve the Tory and DUP issues with the protocol for the above reasons, plus it's a massive distraction. Šefčovič will hold a phone call with James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, on Friday, their first discussion since the new government was formed. I do feel for Šefčovič dealing with Frost, then Truss, and now Cleverly, a man who really needs to change his surname. While insiders insisted it was scheduled as an introduction, the call will most likely be used to sketch out a roadmap for further negotiations over the protocol. It's seen as a precursor for things to come, said one source, adding that the pair would work towards a deadline of the 28th of October, so the end of this month, after which new elections are to be held for the Northern Ireland Assembly, because there's no actual executive in the instalment. It sounds like they have a sort of refresh with talks, with the source calling it a precursor. Feels like the UK, this far down the line, is still trying to figure out how far they can push the EU in talks over the protocol. How much can we get away with? A second source said that they hoped the call, which was rearranged after the death of Queen Elizabeth II, would be the start of a new conversation with the UK, with EU-UK relations breaking down over the protocol bill. It kind of sounds like a fresh start, but we have seen this before. We saw this when Liz Truss was first put in charge, essentially was the de facto Brexit secretary. We saw a kind of restart. She was a lot nicer to Šefčovič, and then she turned full monster. Their comments offer new hope that a compromise over the protocol can happen. In my opinion, I'm not seeing where this optimism is coming from unless the UK has changed course. Here, the UK have only offered the EU have only offered more limited checks, so long as they get access to live data for goods going from GB to NI, which that's the thing that kind of lets you see outliers to see where issues, with lorry containers could come from. Brussels believes that a deal on the protocol could be struck within a month because of the economic turmoil in the UK, and is pretty optimistic from both sides, really. Multiple sources told The Telegraph that Šefčovič, the EU's Brexit negotiator, hopes the situation means Liz Truss will be a keen broker for a Brexit compromise in order to focus the issues at home. That, in my opinion, won't happen. It looks like Truss does not seem to want to draw the connection with the mini budget and the pound falling, the Bank of England's actions, and the bond value crashing. In recent public interventions, both Šefčovič and Truss expressed their desire to reach a negotiated settlement. It doesn't look like Truss wants to focus on issues at home, because if that was the case, they wouldn't have done the mini budget, for example. There's no reason for them to want to resolve the Northern Ireland Protocol issue, in my opinion, apart from instability in Northern Ireland, but we haven't seen that really boil over just yet. In recent public interventions, both Šefčovič and Truss expressed their desire to reach a negotiated settlement, and then Truss crashed and burned everything. She tanked the talks to appeal to the ERG. We all remember that, the heel turn, as the Americans would call it. The Prime Minister, however, has said that a deal would have to deliver on all the things set out in the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which is making its way through Parliament. So based on that, in my opinion, it won't happen. Senior EU sources have argued that the legislation which hands ministers the power to unilaterally tear up parts of the protocol must be taken off the table as part of the agreement, which makes sense. And here's the issue: Truss has set the bar at the UK that the UK can/should be able to rip up the protocol at any moment if the EU keep wanting checks in the RSC, and the other parts like taxation, things that keep a level playing field, especially for Northern Ireland since it's part of the EU single market for goods. That level playing field has to exist because of Northern Ireland, because it will create an even bigger hole in the EU single market. The other issue is that the UK is getting rid of the need for any paperwork for goods going from GB to NI. I think the paperwork is probably the most contentious bit, because the paperwork can be expensive and checking papers causes delays at ports, because the ports don't have the facilities yet either, or the staff to check all this paperwork, which causes further delays. The Telegraph understands that Sefcovic will tell Mr. Cleverly the EU would accept any compromise being framed as a British victory if it brings an end to the lengthy dispute. And this is how desperate the situation is. The EU will give the UK a win on the optics. I think if we just accept minimal checks in the REC, ensure paperwork is still needed, at least a cut down in the amount of paperwork, and give the EU access to the live data so that if the EU thinks any lorries are dodgy, they can stop them earlier on without them going straight into NI and into the EU single market potentially. The protocol is seen in Brussels as the remaining stumbling block the UK and the EU face before post-Brexit relations can reset. This would be hinting at things like the Horizon programme, of which the UK is not part of. It is hoped by officials on both sides of the channel that a pact to remove trade barriers in the REC can be brokered before the 28th of October. If a new executive instalment is not formed by that date, the current caretaker government must be dissolved and a new election in Belfast called. UK and EU officials believe avoiding the situation is key to maintaining peace and stability in Northern Ireland, which I'm not 100% sure about, to be honest. On Tuesday, Westminster heaped pressure on the DUP to drop its boycott over the Northern Ireland Assembly. The main unionist party has refused to engage in talks with its Sinn Féin rivals until the Brexit trading arrangements are either scrapped or overridden by the bill. So effectively the DUP is saying you've got to get rid of the whole thing before we go back in. In a sign of waning patience with the DUP, Northern Ireland Secretary warned that there was no excuse for refusing to return to power sharing. The thing is, though, the Tories are kind of giving the DUP what they want, which is this bill. The Tories haven't played hardball with the DUP. They have tried it with the EU, though. With the Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris, rabid Brexiteer, writing in the Belfast newsletter that his priority is to see the formation of an executive as soon as possible, saying, "I've met all the party leaders in the Northern Ireland executive and made clear there's no excuse for the executive not to be formed." I think, in my opinion, the key issues will remain to be the checks, paperwork, the level playing field, subsidies and taxes. These are the key issues. The UK are looking to get rid of these sorts of things. The Northern Ireland Protocol governs; it gives the EU kind of powers over it. It's more than just border checks. If the UK holds on to the idea that it will create a green lane, i.e. that all goods going from GB to NI that will, quote, stay in NI should not require checks and any paperwork, I can't see the EU allowing that. The EU have compromised a lot. The UK has not. The UK sees the protocol in itself as a compromise, which we know is baloney. And that's kind of the state of play at the moment. There are talks of restarting, which I'll cover soon at some point if we see any breakthroughs. But the problem is the UK want to effectively get rid of the protocol or vast amounts of it, and the EU are saying we can minimise some of the checks, but the rest of the stuff is here to stay. And there's the impasse, the UK playing very stupidly. And the other issue is that the DUP don't want to form an executive, which means that there's no local assembly within Northern Ireland, which makes distribution of money, subsidies and other things much more difficult. And that's kind of the state of play at the moment that we've had for well over a year now, and I don't know how much that changes, even with Liz Truss in charge now. You've got Steve Baker apologising to Ireland, which I'll cover at some point soon, apologising to Ireland and the EU over bad relations, but at the end of the day, he's still calling for the protocol to be changed. And that means that, he might have changed the phrasing of certain things, but the actual actions, the things that he wants, stay the same. So in my opinion, nothing much is going to change here, unless the EU cave, but I can't see them doing that. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.